Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Total OS Today. You are listening to another podcast, TosCast 3, between myself, Tos Today, and Infinitely Galactic from Australia, who is otherwise known as IG. If you haven't already, please check out the two previous podcasts, TosCast 1 and TosCast 2. I will provide the links to those shows after we are done. But before we continue, let me transfer the microphone to my good friend, Infinitely Galactic.
Alrighty, how's it going, everyone? Basically the idea of TosCast 3 is going to be talking about Linux for Dummies and whether Ubuntu is the best option. We'll talk about that, but basically it's just some essentials that you need to know about Linux before you either get started or once you are started. How to do basic stuff, how to use your system like you would your Windows machine or whatever you've been used to in the past. Just basics that you need to know to get you started.
Yes, so this topic, the Ubuntu Linux for Dummies, I had received a couple requests, so I guess it's by popular demand somewhat. From a Windows user, if you are not new to my channel, or I guess if you are new, I would recommend three types of type of Linux distributions. One would be my favorite Zorin OS, Linux Mint, and Ubuntu Unity. Now, some of the questions I have received, I have a few notes here that I jotted. Is it possible to run Ubuntu inside Windows? The answer is yes. From my Windows point of view, I would recommend trying Wubi. That's WUBI. That is a piece of software that was, I believe, originally developed by Canonical. Correct me if I'm wrong. That allows you to run an Ubuntu-based distribution inside Windows safely. And if you choose to delete it, you can do so without affecting your Windows partition. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, it's a very convenient tool, and I think that's how most of us started out using Linux, and it especially was the case with me. I first started mucking around with Ubuntu 7.10, I think, inside a Wubi install, and that's a really good tool, just from the point of view that it installs the Ubuntu operating system just like it would any other program that you would install in Windows. So it comes up with just a very typical setup window, and just go through the options, and it will nicely install it for you, give you a nice little dual boot menu. And really what it's done is it's taken just a chunk of your hard drive inside Windows, so where your Windows is installed. It'll take a chunk of that hard drive and then install Ubuntu inside a virtual hard drive, and then when you're finished with it, or if you don't want to use it anymore, you can just go into your add and remove software in Windows
Yes,
and
yes.
uninstall Ubuntu just like you would any other application, which is very, very convenient.
Yes. Just a quick note, I do not believe that Zorin has the Wubi installed in their operating system, at least not in the last, really in none of them. I've been trying Zorin OS since the third incarnation, and I don't believe they have Wubi installed by default, just to let our listeners know. However, I believe all Ubuntu-based distributions and its variations, such as Kubuntu, Xubuntu does have the Wubi installer, and I believe most versions of Linux Mint, except I believe the Debian the rolling release version does not have Wubi. I believe that is correct.
Yeah, I think that's right. Generally speaking, all of the Ubuntu and the official derivatives, like Total yesterday said, the Lubuntu, Xubuntu, Kubuntu, they all have the Wubi installer, and Linux Mint does customize it slightly for their distribution, but it is a bit of a hit and miss whether
Yes.
other Ubuntu-based distributions include it, like PingIOS, Zorin, MoonOS, yeah, distros like that.
Right, right. Another way to try a Linux OS, for example, Linux Mint, is to run it inside a virtual machine. Virtual machines, at least from my experience, can also be a hit and miss. It is totally safe. It will not ruin your Windows partition. If you are going to try a Linux inside a virtual box or virtual machine, make sure you have lots of RAM, and I recommend a dual core processor. It at least allows you to try it, not exactly at full speed, but it is safe. And I have used that type of software in some of my screencasts many times in the past. I would say it's probably maybe 90% successful without any types of, problems. However, between the two, if you can, I would probably go with the Woobi installer first. And another way of trying a Linux is Unet Bootin, I believe it's called, and running it off a USB. I've also done that in the past with somewhat limited success. It is totally safe and it does not affect or destroy your Windows side of the hard drive.
Mm. Yeah, that's very true. I think one of the best things that Linux has going for it, and one of the most surprising things when you first show Linux to a person, is the concept of running it in a live environment.
Yes.
So basically, for those who aren't aware, you are able to burn. So when you download a Linux distro, it'll usually be as a disk image. So you burn that image to a CD, or you can put it on a USB stick with a tool such as UNetBootin. But then once you boot into that CD or that USB drive, you will then be running a full operating system just off that disk. It's not actually running off your computer at all. It's only accessing the disk that you have booted from. So it won't make any changes to your system, but you can try the system out completely safely without touching anything else on your computer, which is definitely a plus for Linux, and it usually surprises a lot of people. But as far as performance goes, the live CD option is quite a bit slower than
Yes.
what you will experience on a USB stick. So
Yes.
I would recommend going for the USB live install. That way, it runs pretty much at the same speed
Yes.
as a fully installed system, and you can really get a feel of what the system's like. And UNetBootin is available for Windows and Mac and all those other tools. So it is all those other systems. So it is quite a useful tool.
Yeah, the that's a very good point. The live CD is totally safe, but it is somewhat slowish and sluggish. So I do not recommend it in terms of trying to test it. Test a Linux OS at the best possible speed, but you can. It is there for convenience and it is safe, but it is not the recommended way in terms of trying it at its best possible speed. Just a couple more couple points specifically for Windows users. Try to keep this as simple as I can. For Windows users, keep in mind that when you are trying Linux Mint or Zorin or whatever, Linux is not Windows and vice versa. Now, that may sound overly simplistic, but it's not meant to be. Uh, there are many, many choices of Linux type OSs out there. That can be a plus and it can be a minus. It is a plus because you have lots of wonderful choices. It is a minus because there are so many choices and then choices upon the variations of those choices, if that makes any sense. From my Windows perspective, there is a very little standardization of quality, such as bugs. I am running Linux Mint, the 64-bit edition, and there is a persistent bug that when I boot up, it says the panel bar has encountered an error. So I delete it, and do another one, install another one, have it tuned to my specs, and it happens again. And there are times where when I go to shut down, my computer just hangs. Now, I am not knocking Linux Mint or any of the OSs that have bugs. All computer systems, including Windows types of computer system have their quirks. But keep in mind, Windows users, that when you are trying Ubuntu with Unity or Linux Mint or Zorin, they are free. Most of them are. It doesn't cost you anything. So if you don't like it or it's just not for you, that's okay. Go ahead and delete it. But don't give up too easily because number one, you'll never have to worry about viruses, at least in my opinion. There, I believe there is an antivirus for Linux. Is it called ClamAV?
Yes, that's right. It can detect Windows viruses on a Linux system. So it's more for those who say have
Okay.
an email account which gets Windows viruses and they don't want to forward those viruses on to their Windows coworkers, etc.
Okay. So ClamAV is an option. To be perfectly honest, I use zero antivirus shield in all of my Linux type of OSs that I use. I currently use Ubuntu Unity, Linux Mint, and in my older ThinkPad, I use Ubuntu or Lubuntu, which is a lightweight type of distribution, and we can probably talk about that a little bit later. But Windows users, don't give up. I mean, from my experience, the number one issue with Linux OSs are persistent bugs, whether it be one minor one or a couple of major ones that are eventually fixed or not, but do not give up. And with Windows, of course, you need an antivirus. There is no way around that because just one little bugger or one little virus can cause the dreaded blue screen of death. So, to repeat what I've said, Windows users try Linux Mint, Zorin OS, and there are different versions of Zorin OS. There is the core version, or if you have a older computer, try Zorin OS 5 Lite. I believe the release candidate was released a few days ago. They do caution it has some bugs that will be ironed out. I believe the final version to be released is next month. That's designed for older computers. So once again, Windows users, I recommend either Ubuntu, Zorin, Linux Mint. Be prepared for a certain amount of bugs, or maybe none at all. That's probably not realistic, but usually lately the quality of the OSs, especially those three that I've recommended, have been very, very good. A few minor bugs, more annoyances than any kind of a deal breaker. And for me at least, there hasn't been really lately any kind of bug or bugs that totally lets me delete the operating system altogether. I like having some choices, some good choices. I enjoy not having to worry about any kind of virus whatsoever. And in the end, for me, I enjoy dual booting between either Windows 7 and a Linux OS or Windows XP. I still use Windows XP because with me, after tweaking it, I'll be honest, it still works. So uh,
Yeah, and
yeah,
yeah, also I think it's kind of important that that we just quickly touch on some of the not so much the philosophical differences, but the differences between Linux and Windows that you are going to notice as a user, and especially when it comes down to bugs.
okay,
One of the things that is different with Linux is because of the fact that it is open source, which I'll come back to that in a minute.
yeah,
Basically, each of these distributions is each of these three that we've been recommending, Linux Mint, Zorin, and Ubuntu. Ubuntu is developed by Canonical, which is an actual company which develops this operating system using different sorts of free software and tools. Now, their job is to try and make this operating system as bug-free and as user-friendly as possible. Then systems like Linux Mint and Zorin benefit from the work that Canonical do, and they take that system because it is free, and they adapt it and change just a few things to make it easier for
yes,
different
yes,
categories of users.
exactly.
Now, the good thing is in this process, because of the fact that Windows is a proprietary system that is brought out every well couple of years. If there is a bug that's gone wrong, chances are there may or may not be a fix for that bug until the next version of Windows or until somebody at Microsoft gets the word that there is that sort of bug and that bug becomes prioritized to be fixed. So you could be waiting a while before something changes, before something becomes better, before it becomes more stable, or something along those lines. Whereas in the Linux world, there might be a bug, but within a few weeks, a few months, that bug might be fixed. And so it's a very evolutionary process. There is constantly fixes and enhancements being made, and because of the fact a new release of Ubuntu comes out every 6 months, you also get the latest software and the latest tools of that system on your computer, which of course can be seen as a very good thing, and sometimes it can be seen as a bad thing because of the fact there are new bugs. But
Yes.
honestly, in summary, bugs will appear and they will disappear much
Yes.
quicker in Linux than they will
Right.
in Windows.
Right. Right. Yeah, I have to be perfectly honest. As most people know, both Windows and Linux world of users, Vista was a complete fiasco. It was a joke. It never should have been released in its form that it was. I think Microsoft knew it. I can't prove it. I don't have any like secret documents or anything, but they released it, but to Microsoft's credit, they realized what they had done. They really ticked off a lot of people, including myself, who was and still uses Windows XP somewhat successfully. A couple years later, they released the beta version for people to test of Windows 7, and I was thoroughly, completely, totally impressed. I was able to install it. Uh, uh, Surprisingly, on a machine with just 512 of RAM, not recommended, but it did install, and without all the special, like the error effects or special effects, the machine ran somewhat smoothly, not zippy, mind you, but it ran smoothly without a single blue screen of death with just 512 of RAM. When I was testing it with that low RAM, I knew then that Windows 7 was going to be a winner, and for me it has been. Not a single virus, not a single bug, not a single blue screen of death. Not yet. I'm not saying it's impossible, but for me, I have been very, very impressed. That's why when I, do these videos to try and compare, whether it's Zorn or Linux Mint or Ubuntu, I'm not necessarily a fanboy of either system. I'm a fan of what works. You know, less headaches, less time on the computer is more time for me and what I want to do with my life, with my life and my family. That's how I see things in this tech world. So when I try to compare the two and I say Windows 7 is king, for me it is because you know, now I know some of my viewers here have had issues with Windows 7 and crashes and this and that. Well, if you are a Windows user, specifically Windows 7, and you are having persistent, you know, bugs, crashes, from my end, I would recommend number one, you wipe out the system, reinstall it cleanly, and before you download and install any extra software, download a very good antivirus. I would recommend at this point probably Avast. Make sure it's updated because if you are having persistent crashes in Windows, I'm guessing it's due to bugs or viruses, which is not an issue, at least on the viruses side, which is not an issue in a Linux-based operating system. So Windows users, if you are having persistent problems, either there's something wrong with your hardware or you have viruses that you think may have been eliminated with a certain, virus shield that you have, but that little persistent virus is still there. That has happened to me with Windows XP. I ran the virus scanner and it would find either 1 or 10 or 20, please reboot to clean the system. And sure enough, the virus is still there. Very annoying. But with the Vast software, there is a special feature that runs a boot time scan that when you reboot before Windows loads, it scans. And if it finds any viruses, it deletes it before Windows can kick in, and this will not allow the virus that was replicating itself to allow it to really start all over again and cause such a headache. I hope I'm saying it right. I'm not trying to be, too simplistic or too advanced here for Windows users, but if you are having consistent problems with Windows 7, for me, it's either hardware issue, something's going bad, or you have a pesky little virus that just cannot be deleted with a normal virus scanner. So,
Yeah, good points. And then of course, well, if you get sick of it altogether, then give Linux a try and see if it's something that works for you.
yes,
Also,
yes,
something else that's a bit of a different paradigm between Windows and Linux is that um, the obviously the system is free, so you can go and get Ubuntu or Linux
yes,
Mint or Zorin for nothing at no cost to you.
yes,
But then also then the programs or the applications that you use are also going to be free.
yes,
Now, many people ask, well, if it's free, how can it be good? Because people aren't making any money off it, so there's not really going to be any commitment. And honestly, it's a very good question, and I'm not going to
yes,
answer it in entirety. But basically, at the end of the day, it comes down to because Linux as a core system is very powerful and very adaptable, a lot of companies invest time and money into developing Linux and making it better because it
yes,
works best for them. And that's where us as everyday users, that's where we benefit because companies like IBM, like Novell, like Red Hat, they invest time and money
yes,
into making these systems better. And then downstream, we get to benefit from those changes. And developers, because of the fact they can make applications that fulfill their either their own needs or the needs of their company, then those tools get passed on down the line, and it becomes easier and easier for people to make applications for it. Hence, the Linux world either moves forward or there are bugs here and there which eventually get squashed by the next team of people that come through.
right,
So it's a very evolutionary process, and it's constantly rolling along,
yes,
which can be seen as a good thing or a bad thing depending on what type of user you are. So really, when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, it's free, and most people say that it isn't as good as the proprietary software that systems like Mac and Windows offer. And in some
yes,
cases, that's true. But if it works for you and you don't have to pay anything for it, and there's no
right,
maintenance, there's no viruses, and there's no crashes,
right.
system crashes, then you've just got to see if it works well for you. And if it does, then that's great. And if it doesn't, that's just fine because
Right.
it's probably going to be better when you come back and check on it. So
Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, you make some good points. Another thing I wanted to mention, another advantage of being able to dual boot. Let's say that a virus or a bug has attacked your Windows XP or Windows 7, operating system. If you dual boot, you can still boot into Linux. Hopefully, let's say you are running Ubuntu, and let's say that you're having problems booting into Windows because your computer has been attacked so much that it just freezes and you cannot access, say, your precious photos, your tax documents, excuse me, stuff like that. So, if you can still dual boot or reboot into, say, Ubuntu, you can access your Windows files through Ubuntu by mounting the Windows partition through the Ubuntu operating system. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've only done that once or twice, but that would allow you to access your Windows folders and files, transfer them over, or save them to a USB stick. And then if you have to, you can go back into Windows, and hopefully you have your Windows 7 backup disk or restore disk to reinstall the operating system if need be. But I've only used that once or twice. Not that I had a virus, I just wanted to see if it worked, and sure enough, it does. So,
Yeah. And just out of experience, there was once this person that I was dealing with, their laptop was quite old. They'd been running XP for a number of years, and gradually XP was slowing down, especially after Service Pack 3. It really started to crawl along.
Yeah.
But then I think they must have caught something. They must have caught a virus of some sort, and the system would no longer boot. And it
Yeah.
was practically giving a blue screen every time it would just start to boot.
Okay.
So, and it was a basic situation of just getting a lightweight distribution like a Ubuntu because it was an old computer,
Right.
putting it onto a USB stick, booting from that USB,
Yes.
going into the hard drive,
Yes.
just copying all the files over to an external USB drive, formatting the entire computer,
Yes.
and then the person who owned the laptop, they tried Ubuntu for actually I think it was Linux Mint LXDE, but it's basically the same thing,
Okay.
and they tried that for a week or two, and they said they liked it, so.
There you go.
I put all the
Yeah.
files back on there, and their system's been running very happily ever since.
Wonderful. Yeah, just a wee bit of advice. If you do what we suggested, if you transfer your files over, copy them over to a USB, flash drive, and then reinstall your Windows XP or Windows 7, make sure you run the virus scanner on the files on that USB stick just to make sure it's clean because it's possible to transfer the virus to your USB stick, reinstall whatever is on that USB stick to your Windows XP or Windows 7, and then have the virus start all over again. So, just a
Yeah,
piece of
that is a very
advice.
real possibility. Also, another
Right.
quick note, if you're going to be reinstalling Windows, it's a good idea to have a look up online about having a separate data partition. That way you can wipe the operating system and it doesn't touch your data. So yeah, I'm not going to
Yes.
go into that now,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's worth looking up how to do that on Windows because it is quite easy. And
Yes.
also, it's also worth looking into how to keep Windows up to date, how to keep
Right.
your virus up to date, and also
Yes.
how to keep Windows maintained as far as cleaning out temporary files and things like that that might be hanging around and causing problems.
Right, right. Yeah, I did mention Avast, AVST, which is good. Another one that I've heard good things, it's Microsoft owned of Shield. It's Microsoft Security Essentials, totally free. That is available, I believe, for both Windows XP and Windows 7. From the test reports that I have seen, it actually works pretty good. And of course, it's made by Microsoft, so you shouldn't have any problems with it installing it or any bugs as far
Mm.
as running it. And of course, it's free. And if you don't like it, just delete it and try something else. But whether you are running Windows XP or Windows 7, I mean, it's just the reality of the technological world. You really need an antivirus shield. Not so, at least not yet, as far as Linux goes. Now, I've read this or I heard this in the past. The reason why you do not need a virus shield for a Linux-based system is because the Linux hackers or the people who write these bugs or viruses for Windows are Linux users. So why would they want to hack themselves? I don't know how true that is. Maybe my friend can expand on that. But that's what I read or I heard. Be it as it may, if you are running Windows, you need an antivirus. There's just no way around that. Keep it updated, and assuming that there are no viruses or flaws in the initial installation of Windows 7, like I said, for me, it's been absolutely perfect. And at this stage of the game, I am comparing everything fairly or unfairly to Windows 7 because that is the standard.
That's the standard, and that's honestly the market share at the moment.
Yes.
Uh, I think I can't remember what the exact statistics were, but I think well over three-quarters of all consumer computers on the planet today are running Windows 7. The business sector is a completely different market, but as far as consumer computer goes, just for everyday people, Windows 7 is unquestionably king at the moment.
Yes. I still get the occasional comments on some of my videos of people who've had a very, very bad taste with previous versions of the Windows OS or just the software. I remember doing a very brief video and commenting on Internet Explorer 9 that I thought, wow, this actually looks pretty good. It works fine, and I thought you should give it a try. And one of the replies was, I'd rather have cancer. And I'm like, I don't think so. But I understand if it didn't work for you in the past and you had a and it left a bad taste in your mouth, you're probably not willing to try it again. That
Mm,
is perfectly understandable. So far, with with the friendly types of Linux OSs such as Zorn, Linux Mint, Ubuntu, I've yet to have such a bad experience that I've quit using that type of OS altogether. That hasn't happened. Now, there are these so-called unfriendly types of OSs that I don't use, and I believe one is Arch Linux. That's not quite user friendly, or the ones that are based or like Gentoo based. I'm assuming
yeah,
that's okay. Yeah, I mean OSs like that I would probably stay away from unless you are a seasoned Linux user, know what you're doing, then it's perfectly fine. I don't use them. As a Windows user, I like to keep it simple. That's why I stick with either, Ubuntu, either the GNOME version or the Unity version, and its offshoots such as Ubuntu or Zorn or Linux Mint. Um, they work, and probably for another very good reason, they have an automatic installer that allows you to either erase the whole hard drive or install it side by side with some of the OSs. I believe the Debian, the Linux Mint rolling distribution, does not have an automatic installer, which means you have to custom install a custom partition the hard drive to allow you to reboot.
mm,
I've had mixed success with that in the past. It seems like I always miss something. So I will ask my friend this question. If you know off the bat, how do you custom partition to install, say, a
yeah,
Linux OS that does not have the automatic installer? What is the proper
yeah.
way of doing it? Yeah.
It's a very good point. Honestly, in most situations, most modern and user-friendly distributions are going to have their own automatic partitioner, and honestly, that's generally considered to be the scariest part of
Yes.
installing an operating system is
Right.
how am I going to make sure this doesn't mess up my whole computer?
Yes.
And
Yes.
there are several ways that you can go about this, but when it comes down to it, even just on a quick side note, Linux Mint Debian is meant for people who are comfortable in Linux. They're not absolute experts. They don't have to be, but they're people who have used Linux for a
Yeah.
little while. Otherwise, I'd just recommend sticking with just the regular Linux Mint, which is based on Ubuntu. Anyway,
Right. Right.
as far as partitioning goes, probably the most widespread partitioning tool, at least on the Linux side, is a program called gparted, and that's generally what most distributions will use to partition the hard drive. Now, basically, when you come into a computer that has not had anything done to it since the day you bought it, there will be usually two and sometimes just one sections on your hard drive. And that section will hold your Windows install and all of your data. And then sometimes there might be a recovery partition, which is if everything goes wrong on your laptop, you can restore it to the factory settings.
Very good
Um,
point. Yes. Yes.
but uh, basically, when it comes down to it, what you want to do is inside Windows, you will need to go to the Start menu. You want to go up to Computer, right-click Computer, go down to Manage, click Manage, and then in there you will see on the left-hand panel you'll see a tool which says Disk Management. And if you go into Disk Management, you can see a visual representation of your hard drive. You'll want to select the biggest one that you can find, which is usually the C drive in most cases. You want to right click that and then ask it to shrink. And then you'll need to select how big you want your C drive, which is where your Windows install lives, how big you want that drive to be. And which then, when you freed up that space by shrinking the C drive, you will then have room to install a Linux partition which is then when you reboot into the live CD or the live USB, You'll then go into gparted, and you will see a nice big empty space in your hard drive. So generally speaking, if you've done it correct, and Windows has just done the default options, there'll generally be a big blank space on the visual representation of your hard drive on the right hand side, and basically there are really two essential parts to a Linux system that you need to have a drive for. You need to have a root drive, which is basically like the C drive of a Linux install, of a Windows install, and you'll need a swap drive, which is essentially like RAM on the hard drive. So if you run out of RAM, it'll start using a small section of the hard drive. Now you'll need at least, in my experience, you need at least about 15 gigabytes for a root drive on a Linux install, and that's all the space you're ever going to need, at least in my opinion, depending on how many programs and things you install afterwards. But once you have, so basically you just click on that large empty area and then just say new partition, and then so you right click on that, say new partition, then you enter in how big you want that partition to be, and then you will enter in what sort of partition you want, which is again different file systems, and that differs depending on what distribution you're using. The standard is generally ext4, and that's like FAT or NTFS for the Windows file system, but for Linux it's ext4. Then what you'll want to do is just enter in how big you want it, and then click OK. And you can see on the graph on the top end of gparted, you'll see the difference in your hard drive picture. Now, it hasn't actually done those changes yet. It's just showing you what it will be when you click apply. When you're happy with it, and this doesn't require you to touch the Windows C drive, which will generally show up on the left-hand side of that graph. Once you're happy with it, then you click apply, and it will shrink that volume down and put in the new partition for your root drive. Then you'll just want to do the same process. Click on the empty space, new partition, just a small, usually about 3 gigabytes of swap, and you'll just change the option to Linux swap, and then that will be all fine and dandy. Then whatever space you have left, I recommend using that as your home folder. Your home folder is essentially where all your personal data is going to go. And then you just do the same process again. Right-click the empty space, go down, select home, select /home as what you want to use that partition as, ext4, and OK. Then you'll see at the end what your hard drive is going to look like when you press apply. You press apply, all those changes will be committed to your disk, and you should be fine. And then the installer should figure out then where to put different data, and you should be fine.
Well, there you go. To both our listeners of our respective channels, you just heard a very excellent, detailed set of instructions on how to install how to correctly install a Linux operating system without using an OS a Linux operating system that does not have the automatic installer. So for those of you who are somewhat courageous and adventurous, the one nice thing about doing these podcasts, or really even the videos, is that you can go back or fast forward and take notes, so you don't make any mistakes. But that being said, what you just heard was an excellent set of instructions. If you so choose to install a Linux operating system that is not, Linux, Zorn, or Ubuntu. I myself, as a Windows dual booter, don't really mess with those type of OSs. I do not recommend it. However, if you wanted to, if you follow those instructions you just heard, you should be fine. Now, that being said, just a word of caution on no matter what type of Linux operating system you have, and I mean no matter what, back up your important files first, because nothing is 100%. Now, you already know this, but I'm just saying it again. Back up any important documents you have. I have various, flash drives here and external hard drives to, back up my, my videos, pictures, and documents and stuff like that. Number two, if you happen to just buy a new computer or in the market, a lot of new computers, there will be a pop-up that gives you a word of caution to allow you to create your own restore disks. You should do those immediately before installing any extra software to avoid, any kind of virus that might mess up your computer from creating those original disks. Now, once you have those disks, if you try to install Linux and something happens and it just breaks for whatever reason, that's okay because you have those original disk. In my situation, when I bought this new IBM desktop, I believe it was 3 or 4 DVDs to create. It really didn't take that long, maybe an hour, but I have them just in case something happens and I cannot reboot back into the system. Now, if you don't have those disks and something happens, it's not totally lost. It can still be fixed, but it's going to take you much, much longer and much more heartache. So I recommend to both Windows and Linux users have a backup. Unless, of course, you just don't care about Windows anymore, you're so fed up with it and just want to use Ubuntu. That's fine and dandy. Go for it. But if you enjoy dual booting like myself, always, always, on each computer, by the way, I'm currently running one desktop and 2 laptops, always have a backup in case something happens, whether it be a bug crash or a virus, causes it to crash or blue screen of death. Have all your important files backed up to avoid any heartache down the line. Now, that being said, if you are listening to this podcast for the very first time and have heard or are curious about trying Ubuntu, Linux, or Zorn, congratulations. I think it's great because you have choices. So, if you haven't already, on my channel, check out, I believe it's called the Complete Linux Mint Install Guide Tutorial or something like that. I know it's kind of a long title, but that one I separated. I did that into 3 parts. Now, it was rather long, but I was trying to be as thorough and as safe as humanly possible to let a brand new Linux user install Linux Mint or Ubuntu or Zorin, because it applies to all three because they all have the automatic installer, which allows you to install Ubuntu, Mint, or Zorin alongside Windows 7 without any issue. So if you follow those 3 videos, you should be okay. IG, have you done a tutorial like that? I don't know if you have or not. If you have, then definitely the listeners should go check out that. But otherwise, check out the 3-part tutorial on the Total OS Today channel. That'll get you started absolutely from scratch. And of course, if you miss something, you can always go back and take notes and go from there. But if you follow those instructions, some of those instructions for the Linux, people who are not new to this, it may have been somewhat repetitive or redundant. I meant to be that way for a specific reason. It's for the brand new Windows or, well, I guess Linux dummies. Now, I use dummies as a figure of speech, of course, for the brand new users or newbies to Linux who want to try a Linux-based operating system without having a heart attack. So, there you go. Take a look at that 3-part, the Complete Linux Mint Install Guide tutorial or something like that. Don't skip any steps. Start with video 1, go to 2 or 3, and you should be fine.
And honestly, that's generally the case with most of these operating systems that we are talking about. Honestly, the internet is a wealth of information when it comes to these things. There are multiple install tutorials for all sorts of systems,
Yes.
some better than others, but yeah, definitely go and check out TOS Today's install tutorial for Linux Mint. It's definitely one of the better ones for sure.
Thank you.
Um, yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So yeah. Honestly, when it comes down to the end of the day, if you want to give Linux a go, then just use it safely. have backups available. That if something went wrong, which honestly it's not really going to happen nowadays, but if
Right.
it does, you will be sorry. So make sure you have a backup and then pop that live CD or the live USB or even VirtualBox
Right.
and just have fun with it and just yeah and just tinker around with it, see what you can do, see what you can't do, see what you wish you could do, and then just have a look online, do a bit of research,
Right.
watch a few videos,
Right.
and you'll generally learn your way around pretty quickly. These systems that the three that we have recommended, they're designed by people that want to make an easy operating system. They're designed by people which are frustrated with Windows or they know that Windows has its limitations. So they're
Yes.
trying to make a computing experience as simple as possible.
Right.
So honestly, you can't really go wrong with any of those three distributions. Obviously, Ubuntu has the corporate backing. So
Yes.
generally, when you hear of Linux, it will be Ubuntu that you hear.
Yes.
Um, but Linux Mint and Zorin OS, they both benefit from the work that Ubuntu does, and they just customize the Ubuntu experience and make it
Yes.
more suitable for a
Right.
Windows user.
Right.
So
Right.
just have fun with it and just be safe, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, just make sure you follow those precautions. And apart from that, I think you'll have a good time. And even if it's not something that you could use long term, it's at least good to have just as a emergency option. If your Windows dies and you have to get your files off, you can do it and you know how to do it because you've messed around with Linux before.
Right. Right. You know what, a topic like this, Linux for Dummies or Ubuntu Linux for Dummies, I mean, we could probably talk for hours, but at the risk of boring people, when we do these podcasts, we try to be as informative and entertaining as possible. Obviously, the main purpose of the podcast is to help people like with any problems that may have, and if someone has gets a laugh or two along the way, I think that's terrific. But we realize that a topic like this, really anything for dummies can go along, can go on for hours. That's not the purpose of this podcast. It's just to help someone who is brand new or maybe someone who is not so new get started. And hopefully the information here will be just enough to get you started without breaking something. Now, obviously, if we miss something or you're still confused, please check out both of our respective channels, Total OS Today or Infinitely Galactic. Feel free to send any comments or questions. Now, that being said, I did promise a couple viewers that left comments that I would try to answer a couple questions. I have some notes here. Give me 1 second. Okay. I believe one of the questions was, is it possible to disable the constant password pop-up every time you're trying to install software in Ubuntu? And I believe the answer is yes. I've never done it, but I believe that is possible. Is that a yes or no?
Yeah, I personally, it all depends, I guess, on what system you're using. If you're using Ubuntu, um, I think it comes down to there can be an option on the password pop-up that just says remember this for the end of the session.
Okay.
Generally, what will happen though when you install a piece of software from the Ubuntu Software Center or from Synaptic Package Manager or something like that, it'll come up with the password. You enter in your password, you press enter. Then in the status tray or the system tray, either on the top panel or on the bottom panel, depending on what system you're using, there will be a little key or something similar. Then what you'll want to do is just right-click that and look through any options that might be available, and see if you can change the time it takes for it to drop the elevated privileges. That's the actual terminology they use. So
Okay.
yeah, you just click on that little icon in the status bar, and by default, I think it's there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So if you are installing multiple pieces of software from the software center, then you don't have to enter your password every single time within
Okay.
a few minutes. But after that, it will time out and it will drop them again, and then you'll want to re-enter that password if you come back to it 10 minutes later. But
Okay.
you can, I think, change how long that time frame is before it drops them. So if you were going to do a fair bit of that kind of thing, you'd probably want to maybe leave a timeout for maybe half an hour, and that way, when you do leave your computer or change what you're doing altogether, it will lock it down again. The danger of running as root, that is what you are essentially doing,
Yes.
running with root privileges. The danger of doing that is that software is then able to access the root level of your system and can cause havoc. And that's
Right.
that's one of the fundamental differences between Windows and Linux, is that under Windows, give or take, there is argument about this, but you do have the capability to run as root without any sort of authentication.
Yeah.
And under Linux, the root system is locked down. You can't
Yeah.
change that unless you have that root password. So you can change the timeout, but I'm not entirely sure beyond that.
So I guess the best advice we could give that viewer, or really to all, is do not change the password settings. It's there for a reason. I suppose it's somewhat annoying, but it's not something somebody, is going to use on a 24/7 schedule either. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with it. I've never had a problem with that specific function. So I guess the answer is yes, it's possible, but it is not recommended. All right, just two more quick things here. Looking at my notes. Oh, how much success have you had using Wine, trying to run Windows inside Linux?
That's another very good topic that we could spend a whole podcast talking about. It is possible with some programs to run them under Wine, and Wine is basically a recursive acronym meaning Windows in something is not an emulator. But basically, it is a compatibility layer. So you're not running it in a virtual environment. It
Okay.
is it is genuine. It is genuine interaction with Windows code, but it is hit and miss because of the fact that obviously apps are developed for Windows. They are going to have specific libraries, specific tools that they use on Windows that are not available in Linux. Having
Okay.
said that, there are a number of applications that work quite nicely, including games. So yeah, at the end of the day, if you want to see if an application runs, go to Wine HQ, the Wine headquarters, and just search for that application, and it will be rated, platinum, gold, silver, bronze, or rubbish, depending on how well it runs. Um, and honestly, you'd be surprised of how many games and programs can run under Wine, including Photoshop CS5, Call of Duty 4, and even myself included. I have had wonderful success running Call of Duty 4 under Wine.
Nice.
So yeah, it's possible. Some are easier than others, but yeah, just Google it up on Wine HQ before you go for it.
Okay, one last comment here. I just had a thought. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Microsoft software had that rating on their pieces of software? Cool, good, rubbish. But it's
Yes,
not gonna.
that would be very convenient.
It would be very simple to understand. It's either good or bad, right? Okay, the very last thing before we wrap it up here. Let's see. Oh yeah, are you familiar with Quids channel? Quids. He's from the
Yes, I am familiar with QuidsUp.
excellent bunch of videos. When I mentioned about the intro to Linux for Dummies on my website, he made a comment. Well, this dummy, you need to make a Windows for Dummies for this dummy because I can't seem to get wireless to work in Windows 7. And I thought he was joking, but I guess he was serious. And I wrote back, wow, of all the things that I have had problems, I don't recall having issues with wireless. And I believe I wrote it down here. He was having an issue in Windows 7 where there was a prompt or a pop-up saying password not in correct format. And to be honest, I've never heard that before. Have you?
No, I
Okay.
can't say I have.
Okay.
That is very strange.
It is. Yeah.
The only thing that comes to mind is just what sort of authentication method it's using, whether it's WEP or WPA or something like that. But apart
Okay.
from that, I don't really know.
All right, quids up. If you are listening, I'm sorry we couldn't be more useful. I did promise. I sent them a reply that we would try to answer it, but I guess that's more up my alley. But to be honest, it's something I have never come across before. But I promise if I find an instance or an answer, I will send a reply to Quids Up, another fine channel on YouTube. Well, it has been almost an hour. Time flies, as they say. I think we will wrap it up for TosCast 3 podcast between Total OS Today and Infinitely Galactic from Australia. If you haven't, please check out the previous two podcasts, TosCast 1 and 2, and also the Infinitely Galactic channel. So, from my end, I wrap it up, and I'm sure my friend has a few parting words also.
Yes, so thank you for having me on the podcast again. So yeah, definitely when it comes down to the end of the day, it just is research. If you have an issue, there are millions of other people who probably have had that issue as well. So just Google it, and you'll generally be able to find a solution. And absolutely, if you have any trouble or any questions or comments, feel free to leave to drop us a line on either Total OS Today's channel or my channel, and we'll try and answer questions to the best of our abilities.
Thank you, guys, girls, and we'll catch you sometime in the future.